participant. We welcome you, Professor Uday Bhanu Sinha, Department of Economics, Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi. Professor Uday Bhanu Sinha is a professor of economics at Delhi School of Economics. He studied Bachelor of Science with Economics honors from Ramakrishna Mission Residential College, Narendrapur, under University of Calcutta, and completed his Master and PhD in Economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. After his PhD, he has been the Sri Ratan Tata Trust Fellow at the Institute of Economic Growth 2000 to 2001 and a postdoctoral fellow at the National University of Singapore 2001 to 2002. Before joining the Delhi School of Economics, he has worked as an assistant professor for the 3 years at the Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata 2002 to 2005. His teaching and research areas include game theory, industrial organization, innovation, and competition. Professor Sinha has worked extensively in the area of innovation, intellectual property rights, technology transfer, and competition. He has published in some highly reputed international journals such as Economica, International Journal of Industrial Organization, Journal of Economics, Behavior and Organization, Review of International Economics, Journal of Development Economics, Oxford Economic Paper, Economics Letters, International Review of Economics and Finance, etc. Professor Sinha has been associated with some professional journals as editorial board member, and currently he is the editor-in-chief of the Indian Economic Review published by Springer Nature. For more details about his research, he has mentioned his website. Professor Sinha has been conferred the Export-Import Bank of India International Economic Research Annual Award IERA in 2000 for his PhD dissertation. Professor Sinha has received the prestigious Mahalanobis Memorial Medal National Award in 2012 for his outstanding contribution to the field of quantitative economics. We are very much fortunate that our guest Professor Uday Bhanu Sinha with us. I now just request sir to join the virtual platform, and the platform is yours. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Dev, and special thanks to the organizer for reaching out to me for this particular lecture. And I am also thankful to Dr. Satpathy for taking up the first session, although I was scheduled. And this was basically because of some misunderstanding between me and Dr. Nondi. So I was under the impression that my presentation is 18. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So this was due to some misunderstanding that I thought that my presentation was tomorrow. So I was just preparing the content, and then I thought of preparing some PPT, but all of a sudden I got a phone call that your presentation is scheduled now. So you have to bear with me that I have some rough draft in terms of some of the issues that I want to highlight in this lecture. And so the slides that I am going through is not of much help. It is basically a draft note for me to concentrate on different issues as I go along. Okay, so let me at the outset tell, because my topic is tips for writing the journal articles to get published in Scopus, Web of Science, UGC CARE list journals. So let me at the outset point out that publication is indeed very difficult. Okay, and all of us, those who have ever published in any professional journal, know that there are few rounds of rejections that you have to face. Okay, and if you are lucky enough that your first research paper is accepted by any journal which is standard, so then you should be actually immensely thankful to God that your first paper is accepted for publication. But in most occasions this doesn't happen, and we learn over time with the reviewers report on variety of our papers, the shortcomings of the papers and the drawbacks, and how to improve those papers. So we get suggestions from the reviewer even if the paper is rejected, and that's the context in which the researchers develop, improve, and then gradually disseminate the research paper that they focus on. Okay, so let me begin with another story, and this is George Akerlof's story. So I know that this particular, through this virtual platform, I'm reaching out to all researchers from different streams, not necessarily economics, maybe English, library science, and variety of other science field. So this story is very familiar with the economics researchers, but this may sound not so familiar with other people. So let me just elaborate the story. So George Akerlof was a PhD from MIT, and he got Nobel Prize in economics along with two others, Joseph Stiglitz and Michael Spence, regarding the contribution on asymmetric information, which has become a backbone of many of the economics thinking and research post these articles that were published in 70s. Okay, so the main purpose of this particular year's Nobel Prize was to acknowledge the contribution in the field of asymmetric information, which has changed the way the economists were used to think about economic problems. Now, this is common sense economics, that economics is always about resource allocation, and the research in economics is always about how to improve those research allocation so that the most efficient way the resources are allocated to the benefit of the human society. Okay, so in that context, the dominant paradigm that was there at the time when these particular authors they wrote their papers was that competitive general equilibrium with complete information. So the idea was that if you allow the all the resources, and as a result, you do not need to bother much about the different aspects of those allocations, because the market mechanism is so powerful that both from the competition from the demand side as well as from the supply side will ensure that the people who value the goods most, they get the goods, and the people who are able to produce most efficiently will be producing in the market. So the market mechanism will be sufficient to allocate goods to the proper use, and demand and supply story will take care of that issue. But this particular dominant paradigm, which was mainly based on competitive market mechanism, was a paradigm which was mostly touted in developed countries where markets are mostly developed, and as a result, it was easy that the market works and that see the benefit of those market mechanisms. Okay, but one important drawbacks of that particular general equilibrium competitive market resource allocation was that they assume that there is complete information about all the parameters and variables about which decision makers makes decision. Okay, so the consumers, suppliers, anybody in the society, whatever decision they make the decisions based on the complete information. So everybody knows everything. Now that's a very strong assumption. Now this particular year's Nobel Prize in 2001 was to acknowledge that in many situations you may not be able to get that where every agent, every economic agent would be knowing everything. Now, being in a country like India, it is even more powerful to think that we have diversity in education. And so as a result, many of the decisions that different people takes depending on their educations and ability is maybe completely different. And as a result, that market mechanism in terms of resource allocation cannot be trusted for all the social welfare maximization. So you need some kind of intervention and regulation in that context. So this particular year, they acknowledge that asymmetric information might be a hindrance for efficient allocation of resources. So this was a market deviation from a dominant paradigm of competitive market, okay? And this particular phenomenon that Akerlof has highlighted in his thesis was known as adverse selection problem. And the idea is very simple, and it's very easy for anybody to understand, irrespective of the background in any field of study. So you do not need to be an economist to understand it. So think of a problem that a used car market faces. Now, what is the used car market? Now, many of us, we know that at our first car, we try to buy a car which is already old car. Now, the advantage of old car is that you being the first driver, you know that you will be meeting with some kind of small and minor accidents here and there. So as a result, your car will be damaged to some extent. So it's better to buy the old car rather than the new car. But the problem with the old car market is, as Akarlov has highlighted, that in the automobile industry, now old car, the supplier of the old car, they know the exact details of those cars in terms of the quality that the car has. On the other hand, you being a purchaser, when you go to the old car market, just from the look of it, you would not be able to ascertain the quality of the engine or different other parts of the automobile, which might have faced accidents maybe 5 years back or 10 years back. Different components might have been distorted over time. So the value of that particular old car that you are planning to buy, you would not know for sure. Okay. Now, what happens in such a situation? In such a situation, seller knows exactly how much should be the value of that particular product. The buyer does not know. But when the buyer doesn't know about that product, they can have some expectation about the value of the product. Now they try to offer that value to the seller. Now the paradox emerges. Now, if the price that you offer as a consumer or the buyer of that car, if it is higher than the seller's expectations, based on the quality of the car, that the seller only knows about the quality of the car. So seller has private information about the car. So if the seller is willing to sell the car, that immediately implies that the value of the car in the mind of the seller is lower than what is being offered.
Sir?
Yes.
Sir?
Yes. Am I getting any question right now?
Sir? Sir,
Sir, continue, sir.
Continue, sir.
Sorry?
are we in the right meeting? ये आपका रिसर्च पब्लिकेशन पे ही है सर. I believe ये आप सुना सर. Am I in the right meeting?
Yeah.
Should I continue?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then if the seller is willing to sell the imply that seller values the car lower than the buyer. The buyer, being a smart guy, would know that the quality of the car is lower than what he is offering to buy. Okay. In such a context, the immediate implication of that the market mechanism would fall flat and there will be no transaction in that market. Whatever price the buyer is willing to give for a particular, if the seller is willing, that would immediately imply that seller values the car lower than the buyer. So which would mean that the quality of the car is not as per the buyer's expectation. So buyer should revise its own belief and offer low price. And if it does so, then essentially that would mean that there will be no transaction in the market. Okay. So this was his fundamental contribution in the PhD thesis. This is one of the chapters along with other chapters. Okay. So this tells that the market mechanism might fail when you have asymmetric information, especially the adverse selection problem. Now, this is not only a problem that is there in the car market. This is there also when you take loans. Okay. So as from the bank. So the bank doesn't know the true ability of repayment of the particular customer for whom they are sanctioning the loan. Similarly, in the insurance market, also this problem arises because when a party goes for buying an insurance package, then the insurance company doesn't know whether this particular party is more risky than the others. So whether the insurance company should cover that particular person in terms of the insurance that it is planning to cover. Okay. So this was a very fundamental breakthrough in the area of economics, sitting at a time when the competitive equilibrium was at the hem of affairs in terms of the research area. So now look at the outcome of this particular research that was very fundamental, which has changed the way the economists thought the economics would be run and function. So in that case, look at the problem this particular person faces who got a Nobel Prize in 2001. Okay, so this person faced rejection. This person faced rejection from okay. The first one is American Economic Review, and the second one is Review of Economic Studies. These are the top part of the top 5 journals in economics, and still they are holding their rank in the profession. Okay, and economics, I don't know about the other field, but economics has a very well-defined ranking in the journals. So different agencies, they do the journal ranking, and both AER and Restart, they belong to in most of the rankings in the top 5. Then the third one was Journal of Political Economy. Now, both AER and Restart, they didn't give any referee report. It was simply rejection by the editor that was sent to George Akerlof. Okay, obviously any rejection is bad for any author, so that is heartbreaking. The third was to the Journal of Political Economy. It gave 2 reports. And they argued that if so have I lost the connection?
Sir, some disturbances were there. You continue, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. So then the third journal that gave the reports. Okay, the first 2 journals didn't give the report. So the third journal gave the report, and the referees, they said that if the paper was correct, the economics would be different. And after these 3 rejections, he didn't give up. And finally he was lucky that that paper was accepted in Quarterly Journal of Economics, which is a journal from Harvard University, and that was published in 1970. Okay, so many of you might be wondering what is the context, why I'm talking about that. So this is the publication history of a Nobel winning paper. Now, to come from any field of sciences or any other disciplines, you should be knowing this kind of stories, how this publication history for different people have panned out in their life. Okay, so finally for 4th time he was lucky to get that paper accepted, and this particular paper won him a Nobel Prize in 2001. Okay, so this is the punchline of the story that I tried to elaborate here. Now, Akerlof's original intention was to show that information advantage of the seller would drive the buyers towards the new car market. So his initial plan in the research was to show that because this will lead to that more new cars will be bought, and that would have effect business cycle. Now, business cycle is another thing that we are facing right now, irrespective of the background that we come from. Currently, under the current pandemic, you can see that the most of the economic indicators are very low. So we are at the bottom of many of the economic activity. And so in that context, and this happens historically in all the human society, the economic business cycles, they happen. And the main purpose of doing economics is to improve the economic outcomes so that more people are employed and get better life and the better society altogether. Okay, so with this, let me just now move on to the more relevant maybe for many of you is UGC CARE and some related thing. Now, if you are thinking that I will be giving you a very straightforward answer to the topic that has been assigned to you, then I am sure that you will be disappointed, because the story that I elaborated clearly tells you that a PhD from MIT has tough time publishing his thesis paper. Okay, so that should alert you that it is not easy to publish, and even if that particular paper might have a potential to win you a Nobel Prize. So now I'll be taking up the two usual things that are relevant for most of us is UGC CARE. Now UGC CARE, if you go to the UGC portal, you will know that they have two different lists, and these lists are as per the UGC's own declaration and notification. These lists are dynamic in nature. So that would mean that this list will be changing from time to time. So today, if you publish in a particular journal, so that may not be in the list tomorrow. So that's the potential risk that all of the researchers are taking. So in this context, my advice is try to target the better journals which are better ranked by the international agencies, because the chance of they being left out in the UGC CARE list is very low. Okay, so it is better that you try to always target better quality journals so that your research remains counted throughout your life for any kind of promotions or other relevant issues. Now, this is particular document is now online from the UGC. This is called Good Academic Research Practices. Okay, so they shortly call it GARP. So this has been online from September onwards, I think, and they have now clearly elaborated the way of doing good research and how to proceed about doing research. And of course, towards the end, some publications and some of the reasons why the research papers get rejected by different journals. So the reasons for all those rejections. So I will touch upon this issue in a brief. And I hope that this particular document, if you read, this is available on the net. This will be extremely helpful. And this is a very recent document coming from UGC directly, and which is mostly relevant for most of us in Indian institutions for our academic job as well as promotions and all that. Okay. So the framework of GARP focuses on 3 stages of research life cycle. Now, research design, conduct of research, and research dissemination. So these are the 3 stages of research that has been highlighted by this particular document. Now, research design starts from planning about the research. Now, when you plan for a research, the choice of right research questions and the rationale for doing that research is extremely important, because anywhere that you send your particular paper for publication, first they look at that whether you are addressing the right questions and whether there is a rationale for doing so. So there can be thousands of questions that are there, but there may not be enough rationality for all the questions. So you need to provide not only the right questions, but the rationality of pursuing that right questions towards it finding in this context. Now, does the project potentially have positive outcomes for society, industry, country, or the ecosystem in general? So that's the main questions that are there when you choose a research question. And in this context, the 2 important frameworks that are laid out or are also being highlighted by this particular document is the impacting research, innovation, and technology. This is shortly named as IMPRINT, and this is by Ministry of Human Resource Development. And so they have also listed major sciences and engineering challenges that may be addressed by researchers. Similarly, we also have United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, and these particular goals are also being pushed vigorously by even the journals. So the journal publishers like Elsevier and Springer, they are also asking us that you as a particular journal or editorial board should follow these sustainability development goals of the United Nations when you decide about the specific focus of the research areas that you want to publish in your journals, so that a better society emerges from there. So these are some of the highlighted points, what is meant by raising the right kind of questions in a particular research project. Describe the research objectives and rationales is of paramount importance. Develop a project plan with milestones, roles, and responsibilities. Now, this is very important because research is a continuous process and it doesn't have an easy solution within a specific time frame. However, many of the research might have important milestones to reach, and if you are able to forecast those milestones at the beginning, then it is helpful for you to assess whether the research is going in the right direction in terms of reaching the final objective that is already laid down in your research plan. Okay, so in this current context, you can think of that the development of COVID-19 vaccine is of paramount importance, and most of the countries, most of the research institutions are trying that. And in that context, many of those research may not find the final light of the day, but however, there will be plenty of efforts that will be given to develop the vaccines, and only few will be successful. So this is another important aspect of any research, that research essentially and inherently uncertain in nature. Outcomes cannot be predicted. However, some of the milestones can be of some value because you not necessarily reach the final milestone in your own research, but even the intermediate research that you are able to achieve that particular milestone might be helpful to a subsequent generation of researchers, and as a result, the path of research will remain. Now, you have to, when we all work in under constraint. Now, these constraints are also highlighted that you have to look at the expertise available with you when you are actually planning for the research, and then the facilities that are available and the funding sources. Because without adequate funding, some of the experimental research, whether it is in pure sciences or sciences, require a lot of funding, because the surveys have to be conducted for sciences. If their experimental laboratory resources are needed, so you need whole lot of the funding for getting those things done in laboratory. Now, this is another aspect that keep abreast with the relevant regulatory, ethical, organizational, and other guidelines. Now, this issue is also very important, and I will highlight some of them later. Now, when you are doing research, you are starting from somewhere, and when you are starting from somewhere, you are using the knowledge of some of the previous researchers. In that context, you need some of the licenses to use those research for the incremental research that you are planning to do in that line of research. So the relevant licenses to be obtained, and these processes should be clear in your initial planning stage of the research that you are doing. Now, these are some of the important aspects of the good research question. It should be very clear with sufficient specificity so that it is readily understood by anybody, may not be from your own profession. Okay, so it should be away from other fields as well. So they should be clearly understood. So any problem, whichever field that you are working on, it should be accessible by a general audience of that field. Okay, not necessarily a highly specialist in that particular field. Focused to ensure feasibility given the available resources and time frame. The research should be focused. It should not be spread all around a topic so that you may not have necessary resources to actually complete those all the aspects of any particular research. It should be concise, brief, but comprehensive, nuanced, with a research design that matches the complexity of the problem being addressed, and logical to ensure that the available evidence supports the research claims. Okay, otherwise the basic part in pure sciences or mathematical sciences, we call it the proof, logical proof has to be given, but in other subjects, the arguments that you are making should be logically connected so that your research outcome that you are presenting and the rationalization that you are presenting to reach that particular outcome should be logically connected, so that anybody who is conversant in that field should be able to understand the logical flow of that particular research. Now, this literature review is extremely important, and this actually serves dual purpose. And this is essentially allows you to describe the relevant antecedents before you are placing your research as a sequel to that particular antecedents. Okay, so this purpose is served by the relevant literature review. So I know what are the gaps and holes in the existing literature for which this particular research is being undertaken and the paper is being written. So that gaps and holes, identification of that would essentially require a very good quality literature review so that you identify those gaps and holes within the existing knowledge base. Okay, and that immediately attracts the reader's mind that whether I should be reading this paper or not, whether it has adequately identified the gaps and holes of the research, so that I'm interested to know that this particular the particular milestone that is being created by putting this paper into this sequence of literature, so whether I'm interested or not. Similarly, it provides an assessment of that work by pointing up to the weak strengths and weaknesses of the preceding literature as perceived by the researchers writing the review. So the strengths and weaknesses of existing literature has to be also clearly stated so that any reader can understand the strength that you are coming with in your own research and placing your research in the context of the literature. So in many situations as journal editor, I have seen that this literature review is very badly done, in a sense that some people feel that literature review means it's a description of the existing literature. No, not at all. For the description of the existing literature, any researcher will go and read those particular papers or the literature. What you need to do is to connect it well with your research so that it is in terms of the gaps and holes that exist in the existing literature, and that has to be identified and clearly stated. Now, these gaps and holes also allows you to establish the novelty of the research that you are proposing and writing about. So this novelty, which is an integral part of any research discovery, is, and which also allows in other kind of applied sciences in terms of the valuable intellectual property rights. So that particular novelty has to be established. Otherwise, people would not be interested in your research at all. Now, the next point of order is research methodology. It should be appropriate and rigorous. Now, when I say it is appropriate and rigorous, that depends on the context. There is no hard and fast rule about the appropriateness of a research methodology or the rigor of a research methodology. For example, the story that I have talked about, the competitive general equilibrium model in economics that was prevalent in 50s and 60s, the appropriate methodology was general equilibrium, full of mathematics and a very well-defined mathematical model. Okay, so that was the appropriate methodology pursued by the researchers of those days researchers. Okay, so that appropriateness was not there with respect to what the paper that I have talked about, the George Akerlof's adverse selection paper. So this was not in that sense very appropriate. This was not in the flow of current theme in that particular stream of research that was happening. So your paper can be path-breaking, which may not be actually borrowing from the existing research methodology, but that should be rigorous enough so that the readers are convinced about your appropriateness as well as rigor in pursuing that particular question and towards its logical conclusion. Okay, so this particular aspect is immensely important. And as I'm telling you that any path-breaking or fundamental research typically deviate from this aspect by a large margin, and that brings them, if that particular research becomes valuable in the future, then this methodological aberration or deviation from the existing methodology becomes a standard in the future days. And those are the really path-breaking work. But for most of us, that may not be very relevant. But in that context, what my suggestion is that if you are writing a theoretical paper, mathematical model-based paper in applied physics or any other field or in economics, then you should try to follow the existing methodology that are standard in that field. Otherwise, it is difficult for you to find a journal where it is published. And as I told you, George Akerlof has fast 3 failures for his Nobel winning paper, okay, because the methodological aberration was there. Sorry. Now, so these are another aspects that when we write paper and do culminate the research in terms of a paper, so in many situations, these research are subject to plagiarism, falsification, fabrication, and misrepresentation. Now, this is clearly pointing towards the honesty and integrity of the researcher. Now, research misconduct is defined as fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism in proposing, performing, or reviewing research, or in reporting research results, okay? And if you go about the definitions of those, so fabrication is a situation where the people make up data or results, okay? So that is not clearly borne out by the available data, but they try to fabricate those data to come to a conclusion, and that's wrong, plain wrong. In a sense, this is a dishonest behavior, obviously not at all ethical, and it violates all ethical standard in terms of honesty and integrity of the researcher. Falsification, manipulating research materials, equipment, or processes, or changing or omitting data or results such that the research is not accurately represented in the research record, okay? So I will also touch upon that when you do dissemination, this particular falsification aspect is important, because if you do something innovative, then other researchers, when they read or they replicate your experiment, they should be able to replicate it in toto. Now, if you do not use the right kind of thing, then the chances that that cannot be verified. So these are subject to falsification, and many manipulation are done by researchers in order to publish in the journals, even if that cannot be properly verified in certain context. Plagiarism, it is rampant. Now, right now, plagiarism, there are plenty of softwares that are available. You can get them checked. Most of the journals use plagiarism check softwares, okay? And when I get something on my dashboard in the as the editor of Indian Economic Review, I also get a result about the percentage of plagiarism, okay? So that immediately attracts my mind, and if the percentages are beyond something, and I also look at what are the components in which this particular research is plagiarized, whether it is in the body or in the experimental method or whatever. So I will be able to ascertain whether I would at all be interested to proceed with that particular paper in terms of assigning that to other editors or reviewer. So this particular test is the first test in the context of your publication when you submit it to a journal. Now, all of us know, especially in the applied sciences, where that research in computer science, engineering, and life sciences, among other fields, often yields intellectual property of significant commercial value. So you get patent, trademark, copyrights, and other forms of guarantees, okay, which you can transfer it to other people who can commercially exploit those particular rights that are granted to you. So this intellectual property is a valuable property rights that are established when the research is done. And this is not so important in many of the social sciences, but it is absolutely important in computer science, engineering, and life sciences. Okay, so you can understand that not only the novelty that is important, but if your research is very foresighted, it has great commercial value. Okay. Now I'm coming to the another aspect of it, the dissemination. Now, whatever you do, the final objective is that this particular research should be disseminated to the broader audience. Now, broader audience for a variety of other reasons. Okay, so inform the larger community of the findings of the research activity that you have undertaken. And Dr. Satpathy has told you the variety of ways you can actually disseminate research and have your own profile and see that whether your research is creating buzz in the academic fraternity or not. Okay, so the dissemination, like that I will also come to the right kind of journal that you choose. But dissemination is extremely important for another thing that I was talking about, the related matters, that other scientists should be able to replicate, test, and challenge and confirm. So any research, unless it is tested repeatedly and confirmed by other academic fraternity, especially in the experimental sciences, those research would not be taken very seriously. Okay, even if you are lucky to publish, but it does not have enough potential in terms of replicating, testing, and challenging and confirming, and to build upon for further research, those will not be able to get much of the impact from the academic fraternity. Okay, so this dissemination is extremely important. Keeping in view that this is finally used for practitioners. So maybe you are doing research in life sciences, but would be used by the medical professionals, okay, or pharmaceutical companies who may not have developed that idea, but would like to create a medicine along that line that the research, your research has suggested. Similarly, policy and decision makers and the general public in general. So this is very important that dissemination happens rightly so that it falls and it reaches to the relevant community who could be the potential stakeholder of the benefit of your research. Now, regarding predatory journals and all, you have already learned many of the lectures, okay? Now, the question is choosing the right journal for publication. Now, this particular aspect, if I just take you through what already the UGC has already made in terms of different points. Now, when you select a particular journal, it is not necessary that the selection is going to get you immediate publication, but it is important that whether the editor would be willing to look at, that is the first stage of your screening, that whether the editor is interested in your paper in the first place. If the editor is interested, then it would like to assign it to another editor who will be the handling editor, and then finally it will reach the reviewer. Okay, so these are more or less the standard structure that is followed in most of the international journals published by Springer and Elsevier. Okay, so how to actually choose a journal? First, look at the aims and scope of the journals and match that of your research. Now, aims and scope of the journals are always there in all journals. So you first look at that whether your research is matching with that journal. Otherwise, just because it is free of cost or it is easy to publish and you can send the papers to that particular journal, it is not going to fetch you any dividend regarding publication. Has the journal published articles of similar nature? This is extremely important. And let me tell you, even Elsevier and Springer's, they now actively encourage the researchers to cite the papers that are already published in those journals. Now, why do they do so? This helps the editorial office also in assigning the paper to the right set of reviewers, because otherwise you try to publish something and where that particular journal has never published anything in that spirit. So in that case, the editor will have tough time finding a right kind of the reviewer for your paper. And that also is a difficulty because these are operational difficulty, and that also determines how much time your paper will be facing in terms of the acceptability. If you are lucky to get a quick reviewer's report, then that is helpful. Even if the paper is rejected, getting a right kind of review is important, and that is possible provided that that particular journal has already published in the similar areas. Now, also the journals are evolving entities. So they also over time changes their focus, okay? Depending on which particular area in that particular aims and focus will be more important and relevant for the society. So that's a call the editorial board along with the editorial advisory board decides. You do not have, as an author, do not have control over it, but so it is not necessary that many of the articles are published in my line, so I have done some incremental research and give it to that journal, and that journal will, with high probability, will publish. That's not the case. What is the journal peer review process? Now, typically any good journal, any standard international journal will follow double-blind referee, so the reviewer will not be knowing the exact identity of the authors. But in today's world, this particular thing is also being bypassed by the reviewer. If they want, they can easily give a Google search and may be able to access your working paper version. Okay, so although there is blind peer review, most of the journals they practice, but in effect it is not at all blind, because about 80% of the papers before it reaches the editor's desk are actually available online in some working paper series or somewhere in conference the website or somewhere. So as a result, this blind reviewing process is nowadays is not happening that much because of this additional information available. So if you ask me, when there was no Google, no internet, it was impossible for a reviewer to actually get hold of your original paper. Somewhere it is in a hard copy, some working paper in some university library, so it is not possible. So that time it was like clearly blind peer review, but nowadays it is no longer that way blind. So they will get to know about the author's identity, affiliation, and the country of origin and everything. Now, also this is important that you are trying to publish in a journal, but does the journal reach the relevant audience? Now, this is very important because your purpose, as Dr. Satpathy has mentioned, that your purpose is to reach out to the broader academic fraternity where you know that your research will be read and then further improved upon. So if it is in the wrong journal where the intended audience of the journals is very different from the intended audience that you are targeting, then there is no point publishing in that kind of journals, because there is a chance that your paper will not be read by many people. So as a result, the very purpose of research and dissemination would not be fruitful. Okay, and let me give you a very simple example in that context. So our Indian Economic Review has now come out with, mostly right now it is online, but we are just wrapping up the hard copy also. There is a COVID-19 special issue. Now, when this COVID-19 special issue was being compiled, so then we approached some of the big shot economists who already have some papers already floating in the internet. So when we did that, we realized that some of the great names are also involved with that COVID-19 research. They can easily publish those papers in top international journals, okay? But when we approached them, many of them agreed with to publish in Indian Economic Review, just because of the simple reason that this particular special issue is being compiled, keeping India in focus, and they understood that their paper will reach that intended audience, and that is the Indian audience, okay? Mostly because they have looked at the hardship of the migrant labor, the way the government has handled the COVID-19 pandemic, and the way the Kerala government has handled the pandemic, how our health sector is equipped in terms of handling the crisis of COVID-19. So all these papers, they could have easily gone to some of the well-known journal, top-ranked journal. But many of them, the authors immediately agreed to give it to us. And in that context, I can simply draw your attention to one paper by Professor Subramanian and Professor Devraj Rai. And that paper, which has created a lot of buzz because it was available, it has actually done a survey of all the research that has taken place in terms of the human hardship that COVID-19 has created in Indian context. So that paper was withdrawn from a very reputed journal. I'm not supposed to tell you the name of the journal. That was the authors withdrew that paper just to give it to Indian Economic Review, and we were actually elated and excited to get that paper. And that paper is now available online in the Springer Indian Economic Review website. You can see that. Okay. So with this, now I am also coming to, these are all highlighted by that particular document that the UGC has. So that what are the common factors for rejecting the manuscript in journals. So manuscript content does not conform to the scope of the journal or the overarching theme of a special issue, or is not interesting to the target audience. This is the primary reason for most of the papers being rejected at the desk of the editor, okay? And that saves time for the researcher sometimes, because if your paper is in a field which this particular journal knows it for sure that does not reach to that targeted audience, so they would not be interested to publish it. They will rather reject it, but rejection is not bad. And as I told you, that all of us who have ever tried to publish will always face rejection, and that's the norm. So then that's the reason why many of the papers are rejected, because the correct suitable journal is not identified by the researcher. Manuscript style does not conform with the journal style, format or guidelines. Now this manuscript style is in a broad sense that, suppose a particular journal is actually focused on experimental research, and you give some theoretical research to that particular journal. So obviously the theoretical research may not be of interest to the journal. So it is not about the quality of the findings that on which the paper is rejected. It is simply that the experimental nature of the style of that particular journal and the guidelines that they follow is not in conformity with the research that you have done, okay? But on the trivial ground also, sometimes many of the journals has their own style and the writing may not match. So there can be very kind of light and minor reasons for rejecting those papers, because it does not conform to these three aspects of the journal. Now, duplication or significant overlap with existing work, plagiarism. So this is a very serious issue. As I told you, that most of the journals will have now already embedded plagiarism check software. And we do get to see in the editorial board that the degree or the percentage of plagiarism that is taking place. Now, this is a non-starter. If I see that the plagiarism is there, even if your paper is fundamentally very nice, and it is because of your bad quality writing or not able to differentiate your paper from the other existing literature, which has given a very large percentage of plagiarism, I am sorry, I have to reject the paper on that ground because the software has alerted me. So even if I go in the depth of the paper, then there might be very important and significant the finding, but it would not be possible for me to proceed given that high percentage of plagiarism that is already flagged by the system. Now, some of the results may not be significant enough. So these are some of the subjective as well as some of the journals' own call in terms of what they call insignificant research or incremental research, and for which they may not be interested in. So that could be one reason for rejection. Improper rationale of the study. So this is at the beginning of the planning, the writing the right research question, and the rationality of that particular study is very important. So if it is not properly elaborated, that's a problem that many of the papers get rejected on those grounds. Superficial treatment of the subject matter. Here the rigor and the methodology comes into play. So the proper methodology and the rigorous treatment has to be there in order to attract the reader's mind that you have followed all the right kind of tools and techniques to establish your finding, so that people feel that, okay, this is based on the proper tools and technique. So this is already very robust result. So otherwise they will not be interested and they will reject. Poorly designed study, statistical test, control. Now there are other people with very strong statistics background. They know that any survey that you conduct or any empirical work that you do where the statistics are, statistical notions are involved, it's a highly valuable science nowadays for all sorts of studies. So they are proper methodology has to be adopted. Otherwise, it will give rise to very different results. And so the design of the study in terms of the proper statistical the test methods and all are to be done. So that is very important. Preliminary result that lends to speculative interpretation. So this is another way. Sometimes in a hurry to publish, we do try to send our paper when the paper is not already worked out in all possible dimensions and facets. So that kind of premature study, they get easily rejected because it's not that the area or the path that is taken is wrong or bad, but because it is not yet mature enough in terms of the findings to be published. So you should work more and do tighten your presentations and do far more study and make it more robust. So somewhat preliminary studies are subject to rejection most often. And the last one is lack of clarity in writing. Now this is essentially crucial, but from most of the other sciences and including economics, we are not trained in linguistics or proper English. So as a result, all of us face this problem. So we need to be very, very cautious and careful. And if the need arises, that we should take the help of proper English editor, because most of our publications, except the vernacular language, the literature things, most of the publications are in English. So we need professional editors maybe to help us in writing at the final stage in terms of a good quality presentation and the clarity of languages. So this is extremely important. So these are some of the important issues. How much time do I have?
Sir, you continue, no problem.
Okay. So in terms of the what is valuable research and what kind of research we should do, now do we have a cookbook regarding that? Now, frankly, there is no cookbook. Now, most of the research in the world, if you go back to the innovation history, and you'll see that that is basically the ingenuity of the minds and the inquisitiveness of the minds of the brilliant people which have given us the most of the technology that we use. Today, we are on a virtual platform, and I can tell you that when I was a PhD student, I had to line up for my email towards the end of 1990s in JNU. Despite it being very well-funded central university, I had to be in a queue to check my email. And for that, I have to book a slot in our computer lab so that for a certain period, I will be using my email, okay? So I had to queue up for that. So from that day, which was towards the end of 90s, and today we are all from our home and participating in a virtual platform, and maybe from all across India, the participants are there. So this is really a major breakthrough. Now, all these breakthroughs and the adoption of technology has taken place because of some of the brilliant minds that have gone into the research and innovation in the technology field, and that has, especially in the information and communication technology, that the basic research in those contexts were done in the 80s and partly in 90s, but the fundamental was from 70s, 80s, okay? And the research were done, and based on that, these kind of the improvement has taken place in terms of information and communications today that we enjoy from our own home, okay? So, but as I told you that these are all from the brilliant minds. Now, when they actually do the research, they do not know whether they will be absolutely relevant or helpful for the real world problems. Now, if you look at the information and telecommunication technology, these were the developments of the past to aid or to help the military, and this was mainly done in the military laboratories and establishment in terms of coding and decoding in terms of messages and sending those messages across between different military departments across the globe, okay? And we had seen those words and those signals and messages were also there. And if you are aware of that Beautiful Mind movie, you know that those codes and decoding was a major science in those days, okay, where John Nash was also partly involved. So some of you who have not who have seen that movie will know that that context was also there. So most of the research, when they are actually basic research, when they are actually taking place, they may not know the final utilization of those research, and they would not know in which direction this particular knowledge or the discovery will be used, okay? But it should be always used for the benefit of the human civilization and human society. But in fact, some of the ethical stand were also taken by some of the very well-known scientists, including Einstein and fellow nuclear scientists. They urged that atomic energy be used only for peaceful purposes. And all of us know from the war history that it was misused. And it is a very sad thing that despite that kind of moral stand taken by the original innovator, and the science and the discovery were misused for destruction rather than construction in the human civilization, okay? So when the basic research is done, it may not be directly related to the fundamentals the way people live at that time, the changes, and that may not come into the beneficial aspect of the human society then, but in future it might be used and it will be useful, okay? So in my view, both kinds of research, whether something very particularly relevant at the moment, so studying why there is income inequality in different states or in different districts or in different countries, that's extremely important, and everybody understands irrespective of their background in the different field of inquiry. That's important. But on the other hand, there can be fundamental discoveries and innovation that is equally important, which may not have actual relevance in the current days, but which will be extremely relevant tomorrow. So you can see that many of our industrial things, goods are produced based on sciences, which when they were developed, were not known that they can be properly used and they can actually be used for the benefit of the human society. Okay, so our target of all these research would be the real world problem, but the basic and the fundamental research often will defy that boundary, and that should be equally encouraged, because that's how the knowledge base is expanded, and you never know what you feel today is useless may be useful tomorrow. And then the UGC guidelines also has talked about that every institution should have Office of Research Integrity because of the dishonesty and the manipulation that happens in the research community. So all the institutions should have Office of Research Integrity, which were in the line of to some extent the IQAC that you also have in your college. So that they look at how the governance of this research and the research community should be done, and whether there is any misconduct that is involved, and whether the conflict of interest is avoided to the best of our ability in this context, okay? So these are some of the major challenges. These challenges are not only Indian challenges, they are always there in all the top institutions as well. So these are some of the human aberration that will always be there, because as that word we have known that honesty is there, we also know dishonesty is also there. So that's a human trait that might be the part and parcel of some of the human being. So we have to be watchful so that the basic fundamental norms are not violated in conducting research, in giving the due respect to the original innovator and the property rights associated with that, and conflict of interest, if there is any, should be avoided to the best of our knowledge and ability. So all these things, and if someone deserves a credit for a product or a research that we do, that whether that should be co-authored or not, so that kind of the conduct would also be there. And all said and done, our future lies in how we mentor our next generation, and that is the key. Whether we have a knowledge-based society where there will be more fundamental research and applied research for the benefit of the human society or not, would partly depend on what kind of next generation we are training in our teaching program and what kind of syllabus we are making to take them through. Okay, with this, let me just stop, and if you have any specific questions and queries, I would be happy to answer.
Thank you, sir, for your very insightful presentation. We all are very much benefited from such technical questions you answered, which will help us to publish our journal in future. I request our participant to directly, they can put their question to Sinha sir. Please, sir. What is this? What is the question? Sir,
I have got a question. If I
yes, sir.
can answer, so please suggest a few techniques to be followed at the preparatory stage in writing a paper. Now there is no standard procedure. It varies from one field to another. Okay, so for example, if you are writing an empirical paper in the social sciences, so then apart from the motivation that why you are raising a particular questions and addressing that questions with the help of your empirical data that you have surveyed with the use of proper methodology of survey that is borrowed from the statistics. So you have to be absolutely clear about the motivation of that study, but then that would be your initial introduction, that you try to attract the reader's mind that what you are raising is a very fundamental and important issue in the context of your paper. Now, as soon as you are done, then the next stage is about your methodology, and it has to be clearly specified. Now, this methodology in the social sciences, if you have already adopted a statistical methodology to conduct your study, then that has to be clearly elaborated. Okay, and then finally the finding of the study, and then you should demonstrate both in the introduction as well as in the conclusion that why that particular study is significant, or what is the importance of study in the context. So that is more or less the standard way the social sciences are framed. But I'm sure that in languages or in the proper sciences, the things are very different. So in the standard social sciences, like in a sociology or political science or in economics, the papers are typical, or in history, the papers are typically long, and in sciences, as I am aware from my friends in sciences, they are typically short. So there is no clear-cut tools available. It differs from one subject to another, and you being trained in that particular subject must have exposure to some of these papers from your postgraduate days, which will be helpful in terms of understanding that what are the integral parts of a particular research paper. And for that, you should read very thoroughly at least some of the papers in your areas and the journals that you are targeting very clearly, so that you understand and adopt the techniques from those literature. Okay, there is no hard and fast rule. It varies from subject to subject. Now, someone asked, what is the conflict of interest? Now, conflict of interest, you can always give it a Wikipedia search. They will tell you a details description of that. But essentially, what happens in the context of sponsored research as well as research done in a team. So in the case of sponsored research, some projects are funded by some institutions, and in some cases, this conflict of interest clause is relevant because whether the funding agency allows you to independently publish that research or not. So you have to give a statement regarding that conflict of interest for most of the journals, and you have to give that there is no conflict of interest, otherwise they will not publish your paper. Now, if there is a conflict of interest which is part and parcel of your funding of the project, then obviously there is a conflict of interest, so you would not be able to publish that independently, and the funding agency might have its own norms and ways of publishing and disseminating that research. So in that case, you have to follow that. So at the time of getting the sponsor, you should be absolutely clear whether it unnecessarily ties you or binds you in some way about the free dissemination of your research that you will be conducting under that funding. The second conflict of interest is related to that many of the research activities in the experimental sciences are team activities. So they work as a team. Now, when they work as a team, the conflict of interest arises that some of the contributors, even if they are minor, and since the borderline for who has actually contributed more or who has actually contributed less is not very clear cut, so in that case, there is a potential danger that some of the junior researchers might actually be exploited in such setup. So that's why the governance of research in any organization should be such that it protects the right of all the parties who are involved in the research, okay? So that the people or the researchers, whether they are junior or somewhere related, should not be exploited on the valuable asset called intellectual property rights. So whether it is in terms of intellectual property rights, copyrights, or in terms of patent or co-authorship, so they should not be denied those rights. So there can be conflict of interest in team production, and you should be absolutely clear that what is the modus operandi for being involved in a team research, and whether that can actually lead to a situation that will create a conflict of interest for your own dissemination of the work that you are actually conducting.
Thank you, sir. One question from my side, sir. I want to know regarding the evaluation study, sir. What is the criteria of to do that government of India having some flagship programs? They have their own evaluation this process. If we independently evaluate, then what are the criteria, sir? Please enlighten.
So the impact evaluation, which is essentially the purpose of most of the government policy to know that whether the policies that they are adopting, whether they are actually making a difference on the ground. So that aspect is called impact evaluation of a particular program or a particular policy or a strategy that is adopted. Now, impact evaluation by itself is a way of statistically establish that whether some particular intervention is going to yield the desired result or not. Now, the last year's Nobel Prize in Economics, where one of the Indian, basically a Bengali, Abhijit Vinayak Banerjee was involved, and many of you are aware. So many of his studies were related to those kind of impact evaluation, but they are not essentially the government programs. So impact evaluation can happen in both ways. One way is that if you are proposing a new scheme or new program and you want to see whether that program has efficacy on the ground, you can conduct your own research. But being in Indian institution, we all know that we do not have adequate funding to conduct those kind of research in a large scale. So we are often restricted by the funding constraint, and as a result, it is very difficult for us to conduct. But nowadays, many of the North American universities and Indian scholars in particular, having a large access to fund, including Professor Banerjee, they have conducted many of the research in the line of impact evaluation studies, and they have tried to establish what could be the best strategy to tackle a particular problem. Okay, so these are independently done and they are funded by independent funding source. But in the case of government impact evaluation program and their own framework, this is essentially a government initiative and they have their own framework. These frameworks are often borrowed and also designed by the experts in the field. Okay, so they are not completely dissociated from the impact evaluation as a field of the science. Okay, but they may not be in conformity with what the other researchers are doing. So there can be substantial differences, and those methodological differences or the proposals or the intervention that you are trying to see the benefit or beneficial aspect of it may be different, but there is no conflict between the two. So one is government initiated impact evaluation studies, another one can be completely independent private studies by private researchers or by our institutions if they sponsor those studies. But the major problem with the impact evaluation studies are the wherewithal in terms of the adequate funding, that whether that is available or not.
Thank you, sir. Sir, Promila Das have a question. That you in the chat box you will see that in case of primary student, what should be the limit of sample size?
Okay, so yeah, so this is a very important point, and this is I have not actually gone into this aspect of the journal publication, but let me tell you, this is an extremely useful.
Sir, can you, if you give me one permission, sir, can you talk to you directly regarding this matter?
I think this is to the benefit of all if I address this question here itself. You can definitely reach me. I have my the email ID, which is you can get it from the organizer. Okay, and also in the Delhi School website you will find my email ID. So you can. That's not an issue. But let me answer, because this is very interesting and I'm tempted to answer. So please allow me to answer this question.
Yeah, now, definitely. But sir, I have another question regarding my study, so that I want to know from you, because you know, sir, this is the platform only I can know from you regarding this matter. So that's why I have another query regarding this particular my study area, sir.
Let me first answer this, and then you can raise your question again. Okay.
Okay.
So let me give you a very standard observation, and that is well known. So the good authors and the authors which are prolific, they publish a lot. Okay. Now they are typically very busy. Now, whenever a paper gets assigned to those good authors who have already published in your area and they are assigned the job of the reviewer, they typically tend to delay your review, because they focus more on their own research and own publication. So we as editor, we often suffer from this, that we assign a referee, but the referee takes humongous amount of time, which is completely befitting which is completely self-defeating in terms of the research that is being evaluated, because it might lose its relevance, it might lose its context, because if it is a COVID-19 paper and if you do after review after the COVID-19 and all are gone, so then you can understand that that paper will lose its relevance. So the best authors or the best researchers, typically, they do not give enough attention to review, so they delay. On the other hand, it is a problem for the editor to assign it to somebody who is not a good researcher. In that case, the turnover might be very quick, but the feedback that you will receive might be quite random, in a sense that it may not be a proper evaluation of your work. So there is a trade-off in a sense that it can take longer, but if it is taking longer and if it is at the right hand, you will get a far in-depth review report. On the other hand, if it is a quicker, then it is a matter of luck, like a random draw. So if you are lucky, then you might get a favorable review in quick time. And then if you are unlucky, then that quick review system might end up land your paper in a mess, in a sense that no favorable outcome. So if I go back to my initial George Akerlof, both American Economic Review and Review of Economic Studies, they rejected the paper, not even sending it to the reviewer. Okay, so that's a quick review. So one should be happy that even it is rejection, it is quickly done. But remember that it was not given a fair trial. Okay, so that was only done by the Harvard Journal, Quarterly Journal of Economics. Okay, so you want, whether you want a quick turnover or whether you want that your paper should be reviewed by someone who is expert, and the experts are, how do we know experts? We know experts by their publication profile. And in that case, we sometimes make a choice, and those authors who are actually prolific authors, they take more time in terms of reviewing the paper. So that's a tragedy of our profession, and we have to bear with it.
Thank
Any
you,
more
sir. Then we will provide, sir, your contact number and email to the participants. They will personally may contact with you.
Okay.
We are very much grateful to you for focusing such a very important area and new UGC guidelines regarding this journal and research. We are thankful to you, sir, and we wish you a good health, and we will keep contact with you in future, sir.
Thank you very much, and I have enjoyed my talk. And if it is possible, can I get the link through which I can access this talk on YouTube? I can see that it is in YouTube.
We'll automatically link to the YouTube, sir.
Okay, fine. So you provide me the link if it is there, readily available. Email. Thank you very much. So I'm leaving now, and thank you all for attending this talk and raising some of the important questions which I had the opportunity to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Uday Bhanu Sinha, in this virtual platform. We are very much grateful to you for your kind handover to actually share your ideas on this particular academic topic. Thank you very much, sir. So with this, we conclude our today's session. Good night, everyone.
Good night, sir. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Open our video.